This is the true taste of Kerrygold. It's hard work and dedication. It's the relationship of farmer and cow. It's early mornings, late nights. It's family. It's loyalty. It's rich green grass. It's life out on the pasture. It takes strong hands and a warm heart to make Kerrygold.
Get closer to your cooking with Neff, Slide and Hide, proud sponsor of How to Cook Well with Rory O'Connell.
I love cooking and I love teaching people how to cook. Good food is so important, not just for our health, but for our temperament, and it doesn't need to be complicated. For this series, I've created a set of menus which I hope you will try, either as individual dishes or as a complete and balanced meal. We're so lucky to have some of the best raw ingredients in the world. Let's make the most of them. By this stage, you will know that I regard salads as a wonderful dish to serve as a starter and indeed as a main course. Salads enable you to combine ingredients that wouldn't necessarily work in cooked dishes. For this salad, I search out Irish homegrown apples and I use an apple syrup from the marvellous Highbank farm in County Kilkenny. The Coolea cheese comes from Macroom in County Cork, another outstanding example of the quality of some of the artisan food being produced in Ireland now. I'm going to begin this salad by making the dressing first, and then we'll look at all the lovely leaves and the other things to go in. So, pretty classic start, some olive oil, extra virgin, and I'm using 4 tablespoons here. And then I'm going to add in a little lemon juice. So straight away we're getting a lovely, classic combination of flavours. And then this is the apple syrups, and you'll see when it comes out of the bottle, it's got almost like not quite a treacly consistency, but it's really delicious. And with the olive oil and lemon, really marvellous actually. So mix all those around well, not forgetting to add in a nice pinch of salt and pepper. So always whisk a dressing to emulsify, in this case, the olive oil and the lemon. The apple syrup brings the most lovely sort of floral flavour to the dressing. So the other ingredient I'm going to use in this salad is some Coolea cheese. And is that not a thing of perfection? This is a cow's milk cheese, a Gouda type, but made in County Cork. Coolea is one of my favourite ingredients. So we'll have some little shavings of that on there also. The Brussels sprouts I'm going to slice thinly. You could use a mandolin for this, but I'm going to use a chopping knife. There was a time when a salad like this was really seen as a side event, but not anymore, because we now know that salads, of course, can be delicious as long as you have fantastic ingredients, and they add more complexity to our diet and overall give us a better balance. So that's those ready to go. And my apple, I'm going to just quarter and slice. So cut it in half, and then in quarter. This is a lovely Irish apple, and you could use any variety of Irish dessert apple. Nice neat slices. Lovely. So that's my apples. My salad leaves I have here, and what I have in here, it could be one type of salad leaf or it can be a lovely selection like this. So I've got some lovely watercress still in sort of sprigs like that, and they'll sit up beautifully in the salad. And then some radicchio, bitter, sharp, slightly sour, good balance. Then I've got some tatsoi, and these are all leaves just grown down the road. Some of these ones there are getting a little bit long there. You see we're starting to get a lovely sort of combination of textures. Feathery mustard leaf for a little bit of heat, mixed in with some more mustard, some rocket. So a really nice balance of flavours. Our roasted and peeled hazelnuts, I'm going to pop some of those on, like that, and some of our apples and Brussels sprouts. Okay, so when you are ready to toss your salad, always whisk or shake your dressing up again. So I'm going to put on less dressing than I think I need, because I could always add on some more in a moment. Then your hands just lift the leaves up from my bowl onto our platter. Think of the good things in here for you as well. The final ingredient to combine with all of the other lovely things are some shavings of the Coolea. The sweet honey caramel flavor of the Coolea with the apple and the apple syrup and the hazelnuts is really, really good. So that's a simple thing, a refreshing thing, I think a beautiful and delicious thing, and an absolute showcase of two incredible Irish ingredients. Beef and oysters is a traditional, if somewhat surprising combination that pairs the flavours and textures of land and sea perfectly. The choice of cut of beef here is crucial, and to achieve a melting and luscious result, I like to use the cut called chuck. The oyster mushrooms with their silky texture are lovely with the beef, and the last-minute addition of the oysters and their juices makes for a deeply satisfying combination of ingredients. The starting point for a beef stew, casserole, you'd almost call this a braise as well, is pretty much always the same place. We always start off by browning off the meat in the pan, getting some caramelized colour to add to the flavour of the dish. So this is this beautiful beef that I'm using from the 4/4 of the animal, and I've cut the pieces, I've trimmed it of all fat. So a little olive oil, and then swirl that around in the pan, and you can see my pan is nice and hot. And make sure your meat is nice and dry. Pop it in, don't overfill the pan, and leave it alone for a minute or two to caramelise. Yeah, I'm really happy with the colour of those. So into my casserole. And again, the type of pot that you make a stew or a braise in is very important. So really good and heavy. The heavier it is, the better. You will need to see a bit of smoke when you're doing this. If you don't see a bit of smoke coming from the pan is probably not hot enough. A little more seasoning, lovely. I could almost pop in my carrots and onions in around there. I just want these to take up a little bit of colour. Nothing dramatic is going to happen with these, and they're absolutely not going to colour to the same extent as the beef will. Just pop them in. The whole cloves of garlic, which we'll mash into the sauce at the end, and these have been peeled. Already looking pretty good. Just so as I don't forget my thyme and bay leaf, that can go in there now. Great, that's pretty much that. So everything into the casserole. I could just tip them in like that, just for speed. It's already looking kind of lovely, luscious and sort of precious. Red wine into the pan, and this is going to be pretty bubbly. Now, want to reduce that by half, which happens pretty much straight away because there's so much heat in the pan. Then we add in our stock, beef stock, or it could be a rich chicken stock, and quite a lot of tomato puree. It's actually twice as much tomato puree as there is either the wine or the stock. And for me, that's one of the things that makes this stew really, really delicious. It needs a small pinch of salt and nothing else. That comes back up to a simmer. We can turn off the heat, and we pour that into our pan. The liquid doesn't cover the meat in the pan, but what will happen is, as this cooks, the meat sort of collapses slightly. Then, very importantly, a tight-fitting lid, because we're trying to keep the steam in there. I'm going to transfer this into an oven. I'm cooking it slowly between 2.5 and 3 hours for this cut of beef, so it just breaks down to give a most delicious, luscious texture. While the beef is cooking in the oven, you can go ahead and prepare your mushrooms and your oysters. And these are what are called rock oysters. They can be eaten raw and are often delicious eaten raw, but they're also very good for cooking. So oysters will keep in your fridge for a couple of days. When you bring them home, buy them off your fishmonger, always make sure in your fridge, if they're in a bag, take them out of the bag and just put them into a box or a bowl, but always make sure that the oysters are sitting this way up. So it's got a deep shell, and that's where the oyster sits. If they're sitting higgledy-piggledy in your fridge like that, the juice can pour out of them and they deteriorate more quickly. But if you keep them cold, they are perfectly safe in your fridge for several days. So I find it's handy if I put them onto, I've got it like a bun tray here, a shallow bun tray. And the reason I'm doing this is because the precious juice that's in there, I don't want to lose. I know these are ready in about 5 or 6 minutes' time when I see a little bit of juice starting to appear in the bottom of the trays. That will tell me the oyster shells are separating. So pop them in. A steaming function on your oven would be ideal here. A lovely steamy atmosphere for the oysters. While they are cooking, I can go ahead and prepare my mushrooms. These are Irish oyster mushrooms from Ballyhowra in County Limerick. So I've got 2 different types here. And again, just wonderful that these are being produced in Ireland, because up to a few years ago, a lot of these type of foods were imported. But as I said, we live in a garden. We can grow almost anything here. So this is known as the king oyster, this fellow here. And these are known as grey oysters. And see the way they grow in these fabulous sort of clumps. And you cook them the same way as you cook any other mushroom. So I'm going to slice them like this. You can also, if you want to, just do some of them into slices like that with the stalk. If they're small, I leave them whole. If they're big, I cut them into smaller pieces. Just prise them apart. They've got a beautiful, all sort of a buff sort of finish. King and grey. Okay, so my oil is nice and hot. Don't use too much oil, but still enough. And pop them in pretty much in a single layer and cook them in batches. Okay, a sprinkle of salt and pepper. We want them to get a little bit of colour. So this can all be happening while your beef is stewing, braising in the oven.
We produce our milk off grass in Ireland. Our butter has this creamy golden colour. The taste has always been pure. It's as natural as the day my great-grandfather made the butter. It's just so beautiful.
So I'm very happy with those. Let's just pop the rest of those on. And let's see how our oysters are doing in the oven. So, yeah, I'm seeing a little bit of juice on the bottom of the oven, actually. So I think these are ready. Right. I've got juice in the bottom of the pan, and that's the juice that the oyster has released. So now I know these are ready to go ahead and open. And I'm going to be very careful when I'm opening them to save as much of the oyster juice as possible, because that's got masses of lovely briny flavour. Now, the best thing to open the oysters with is an oyster knife. Okay, so then fold your cloth around your hand like that, so your left hand that's going to hold the oyster in place is very well protected in case your knife slips. And then there's a little sort of hinge here at the top of the oyster where we put in our knife, and then just pop it out like that, and you get your knife underneath the shell. Give it a twist like that. So I'm going to turn the knife like that, so it's going from flat to pointed, and then lift off the top shell, just loosening the little muscle there that holds the oyster in place. Then, quite simply, just turn them out of the shell with all of the juice, trying to keep them as intact and as beautiful as possible. My oysters are ready, so I can see how our stew is doing in the oven. Let's see. Ooh, yes. This looks pretty good at this stage. The vegetables, which another day at home you might think, well, actually that carrot and onion is lovely. I'm going to leave them in there and eat them with the stew. But because I'm putting oysters and oyster mushrooms in today, it's somewhat more refined. So those, as far as I'm concerned, have done their job. Okay, that's pretty good. I am actually going to take the meat out of the pot, because what I pretty much always do is I bring this liquid back up to a simmer. Sometimes I need to reduce it to concentrate the flavour, and sometimes I don't. Irregardless, I don't really want to cook my meat anymore. It's beautifully tender, it's holding its shape. So, I don't want to boil or simmer my meat. The question now is the flavour strong enough, concentrated enough, doing enough justice for the beef? It's pretty delicious, I have to say. In fact, it's almost nearly there. I'm going to bring it to the boil and simmer it for about 1 minute. Then everything can be assembled together, put back in our oysters, our oyster mushrooms, and we're ready to serve it. I can slide back in my beef and we can add in our oyster mushrooms, like that. And also we can add in our cooked oysters. Slide them in on top. You could put in some of the oyster juice, but I don't want to make my liquid too thin. And then I don't want to break up anything in here, so I'm going to use a spatula just to mix the mushrooms and the oysters through. So just gently pushing them in like that. I think it looks wonderful with the oysters and the oyster mushrooms sitting on top. So the green vegetable that I'm using today, I'm using kale. So my water is boiling. Good pinch of salt. Lovely. And then the green vegetables straight into the water at a good rolling boil, okay? Like that. Pop them in, and I can do a little bit more. I love to serve lots and lots of green vegetables with the beef stew, because we know vegetables just is so important on every level, but also just balances out the dish. So they're just going to take a few minutes to cook. And the other thing to remember about vegetables, almost any vegetable, is that the fresher it is, the more recently it left the ground, the quicker it is to cook. So while that's happening, only a matter of minutes, I'm going to get myself organized here for serving everything. My kale is ready, so I want to get it out of the pan straight away. Look at the colour, isn't that absolutely gorgeous? Now, you could put a little olive oil on, a little butter on at this stage, or nothing at all. I mean, that vegetable, just on its own, will be doing you good. With a little poached egg sitting on top, maybe on a bit of toast. Fantastic. But this sort of green vegetable is the ideal accompaniment for a rich beef stew. Just a few little drops of olive oil, just a little. And this is delicious extra virgin olive oil. That will really elevate the flavour. My stew is lovely and hot, so I'm going to slide it in, just in one go, into my pot. Nice and gently. There's always a little moment when you wonder if that's the right thing to do, and it was the right thing to do. And then finally, the last thing I like to put on is just a good sprinkling of chopped parsley. And that just sort of freshens up the appearance of the whole thing. So that's rich sort of beef stew with the slightly slimy mushrooms, the lovely briny oysters, lots of the green vegetables to go with it. For me, it's a party dish, and a bowl of Irish potatoes, fantastic. The first stalks of rhubarb of the season are both pale and expensive, and sometimes referred to as champagne rhubarb. The other beautifully coloured fruit that arrives in this part of the world in January is the blood orange. My preferred variety of blood orange is the Tarocco, and that's adored and revered in Italy. The two early arrivals pair brilliantly, and this is borne out in this tart, which is a slightly rustic appearance, but I think nonetheless beautiful. Now, the rhubarb is very easy to prepare. Beautiful fresh rhubarb, it's such a lovely thing. Generally speaking, when you think about rhubarb correctly, you think that it's cooked, but it is actually very good raw. So just cut off the leaves, and the redder your stalks of rhubarb are, the more beautiful they are. So I'm just cutting off the base of the rhubarb there like that, and now I'm going to slice it thinly. So fairly thinly sliced for this. Lovely. I'm just doing it at a slight angle. Honestly, that makes virtually no difference. This technique can be used for all sorts of other fruit. You could make a fabulous apple tart, plum tarts, almost any fruit you can think of, using exactly the same recipe we're using here. Okay, that is our rhubarb. Now, I want to get some vanilla into this tart as well. And instead of putting vanilla extract in, I'm going to put a vanilla pod, but I'm going to chop the vanilla pod really finely. So I'm going to cut the vanilla pod in half, like that, and then just cut it into strips. And then this just gets added in. So it's really sort of fine dice. It's nearly like a dust. It's a curious thing, but a really good thing, actually, I think, this vanilla chopped like this. So I'm going to mix this in with our caster sugar. That's going in there. And vanilla pod or vanilla bean, whatever you call it, is pretty precious stuff. So I'm rather meanly chasing around my chopping board, trying to get every last little bit up. Okay, I'm going to mix that in. So just keep a little for sprinkling over the tart at the last minute. And mix that around. And that is our rhubarb ready for assembling with the tart. The other ingredient in this recipe are oranges. So just cut a little slice off the top like that, and the bottom. So just peel the oranges as if I was starting the process for segmenting oranges. So just cutting around like that. I think that's pretty good. That's those little guys. Then I need to slice my oranges. I'm going to pop them onto my little plate here, so they'll be ready to go. So I'm slicing those about a half a centimetre thick. Great, lovely. Now I'm going to go and get the pastry. So need a little bit of space when we're rolling. So I'm going to roll my pastry into a big circle, about 36 centimetres, that sort of thing. A little bit of flour on my work surface. This is a rustic tart, so it's going to have a slightly rustic finish, so somewhat forgiving from a visual point of view. A little bit more flour on top of the pastry like that, and then we start rolling. Okay. So keep going, keep moving the pastry on your work surface. We're trying to get a circle. That's vaguely a circle, I suppose, isn't it? Yes, it is. Now, what's very important at this point is to remember, before you put the rhubarb and the fruit on, to transfer it on to your parchment-lined tray. Roll the pastry around your rolling pin, nice and gently, take your time. Bring your tray close to you, so you're not trying to do such an enormous stretch, and just roll it out like that. So that's that there. Right, rhubarb is going on. So this is looking lovely, and the rhubarb has gotten a sort of a glaze as some of the sugar has melted just while it's sitting there for that few minutes. So all that goes down. There, like that. Scrape out all of that sugar. So far, so good. Then, at this stage, we're going to pop our oranges on. So we're just going to overlap them on top, like that. Slightly overlapping. Nearly there. One or two for the middle. Okay. Now what we do, and as I said, this is a rustic tart, we quite simply fold the pastry in. Sometimes you get a little bit of overlap, which isn't so perfect, but this is forgiving visually. You get sort of a little sort of crimped finish. Don't forget about the remainder of the caster sugar and the vanilla. Brush off some of the excess flour from there. A little egg wash, which is just quite simply beaten egg. And we're going to just paint that on. In another part of the world, this would be called a crostata, which makes it sound infinitely more glamorous than a country rhubarb tart. Tiny little sprinkling of sugar just on the egg wash. Beautiful. That's going to go into the oven. And while it's into the oven, I usually baste it once or twice. So in other words, lift up the juice that come out and pour them back over the exposed fruit. Lovely. Great, this is looking really, really super. So with a tart like this, given its informality, can sometimes be a little bit tricky to lift. I usually just slide it, and the parchment paper then becomes part of the presentation and adds to the rustic finish. So line things up before you make a move, and then 3, 2, 1, go. Lovely. That's looking great. The pastry is lovely and crisp. I love that colour around there. Little bits of vanilla pod on top, they'll be delicious. And then a bowl of whipped cream would be lovely, yogurt or creme fraiche. But I've got the pomegranate flavoured grenadine cream, which makes the most delicious accompaniment. Pairs brilliantly with the rhubarb and the orange and the vanilla. I think this is a really super thing. Throughout the series, we've cooked really beautiful ingredients, a lot of them the best of what Ireland has to offer. You can choose an individual dish from one of the meals, you can cook the entire meal. In any event, I hope you enjoy cooking it, and I hope you enjoy eating it.
Get closer to your cooking with Neff Slide and Hide, proud sponsor of How to Cook Well with Rory O'Connell.